David's fingers hovered over the cup, his instincts screaming louder than ever. The aroma wasn't just off, it was wrong. His wife's smile was too composed, her eyes too calculating as she watched him. The weight of months of suspicion crushed down on him in that moment. Without a word, he reached across the table and swapped his cup with Emily's. A flicker of hesitation crossed Rachel's face, so brief it was almost imperceptible. But David caught it. He held his breath as Emily lifted the cup to her lips and took a slow sip. Then she blinked. A second later, her fingers trembled against the porcelain. Her smile faltered. David's stomach dropped. It wasn't paranoia. It was real. Before we dive deeper into the story, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. And if you enjoy these gripping tales, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. David Carter sat at the long wooden dining table in his sister-in-law Emily Foster's elegant suburban home in Seattle, Washington, sipping on a glass of water as the warm hum of conversation filled the room. The late morning sun filtered through the large bay windows, casting a golden glow over the carefully set brunch table. Freshly baked croissants, bowls of fruit, and steaming platters of eggs and bacon filled the air with a comforting aroma, the kind of scene that should feel inviting, familiar, safe. But David felt anything but safe. Across the table, his wife, Rachel Carter, was the picture of effortless charm, laughing lightly at something Emily had said as she reached for the pitcher of orange juice. At 40, Rachel had mastered the art of appearing graceful and composed at all times. Her honey blonde hair fell in perfect waves over her shoulders, her makeup subtly enhancing the sharpness of her high cheekbones and piercing green eyes. She was dressed in a simple yet elegant navy mule dress, the kind that made her look like the perfect wife, the woman every man dreamed of. At least that's what everyone else saw. David, however, had learned that perfection could be an illusion, a carefully constructed facade, one that only lasted until you started noticing the cracks. And lately, the cracks in Rachel's perfection had begun to show. It was in the way she had become too attentive, too sweet, her affection feeling rehearsed rather than genuine. It was in the subtle way she glanced at him when she thought he wasn't looking, as if calculating something, as if waiting for something. He hadn't confronted her, not yet, but he was watching. Emily, oblivious to the tension simmering just beneath the surface, poured herself another cup of coffee, her long auburn hair swaying as she shifted in her seat. She was Rachel's older sister by just a year, though their personalities couldn't have been more different. Where Rachel was controlled, polished, almost calculating, Emily was warm, open, and refreshingly unfiltered. David had always liked her, though he had never confided in her about the quiet unease that had settled in his gut these past few months. Rachel's voice pulled him back to the present. "Here, honey, I made you something special." She set a steaming cup of coffee in front of him, her smile flawless, practiced. David looked at the cup, then back at her, something deep in his gut twisted. Rachel reached across the table with an almost choreographed grace and set a steaming cup of coffee in front of David, her smile unnervingly perfect, as if rehearsed for a stage. The room's golden light seemed to enhance every feature of her poised demeanor, yet David's eyes narrowed ever so slightly as he observed the cup. He had always trusted his gut, a strong, unyielding instinct that had never let him down before. And now it whispered a warning he could. Normally, coffee in a house like this would exude a deep, earthy aroma that promised warmth and comfort. But as David inhaled, he detected something peculiar. A faint, almost imperceptible metallic tang that clung to the steam like a secret. His mind raced as he weighed the possibilities, the rational part of him urging dismissal of a mere olfactory anomaly, while his instincts screamed that something was amiss. Was it just his imagination, or had he sensed a deliberate tampering? The conflicting thoughts churned inside him, a quiet internal battle between trusting what his gut told him and convincing himself it was just paranoia born from sleepless nights and an overactive mind. He forced a smile and nodded politely as Rachel's eyes sparkled with insincere warmth. Yet every fiber of his being was alert, scrutinizing every detail. The coffee's aroma, instead of filling him with comfort, sent an inexplicable chill down his spine, leaving him momentarily frozen in thought. He glanced around subtly, noting Emily's relaxed posture and genuine laughter, contrasting sharply with the tension that now coiled within him. With every passing second, the metallic note grew more intrusive in his thoughts, an unwelcome reminder that not everything was as it seemed. His heart began to pound softly in his chest, echoing the rising crescendo of his doubts, while his mind remained sharply focused on that single, suspicious cup of coffee. As he tried to reconcile the pleasant facade of the brunch with the unsettling anomaly before him, a part of him already braced for what might come next, knowing that sometimes the smallest details could unravel the grandest of deceptions. In that quiet moment, amid the clink of cutlery and soft murmurs of conversation, David realized that nothing in life ever came without a price, and today that price might be his own sense of security. In the midst of the gentle clamor of conversation and laughter, an unexpected commotion sent David's pulse racing. A slight bump, almost imperceptible, caused the table to jostle, and in that fleeting moment of chaos, David acted on instinct. His hand moved with calculated precision as he discreetly switched his coffee cup with the one in front of Emily. The accidental knock had been just enough to create a momentary distraction, and while Rachel's eyes flashed in a brief moment of hesitation before she recovered with a forced laugh, David's mind was already racing. He realized with a jolt that Rachel hadn't been watching him at all. Her gaze had been fixed intently on his cup, as if its contents held the key to a secret only she knew. Every detail now took on new meaning: the way her smile faltered for a split second, the slight tightening around her eyes, and the almost imperceptible shift in her posture. Even as the room returned to its normal rhythm and the conversation resumed, David's heart pounded with the force of 1,000 unanswered questions. He maintained a veneer of calm, pretending that nothing was out of place. All the while his inner turmoil roiled like a storm threatening to break free. The swap, so subtle yet so profound, had left him with a deep, lingering sense of foreboding. In that charged moment, David understood that the ordinary had become extraordinary, that every gesture was loaded with hidden intent. With his pulse still racing and every nerve alert, he braced himself for the inevitable unraveling of truths, knowing that the smallest misstep could reveal secrets that would upend everything he believed in. Emily lifted the coffee cup to her lips, taking a slow sip before setting it back down and continuing her conversation, completely unaware of the unseen threat she had just invited into her body. At first, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. She laughed at something Rachel said, casually stirring the remnants of her coffee with a small silver spoon. But then, just a few minutes later, David noticed the first shift. She blinked, her expression flickering with mild confusion, as if she had lost her train of thought mid-sentence. Her fingers twitched slightly against the porcelain cup, her nails tapping in a slower, less rhythmic pattern than before. A faint furrow appeared between her brows as she pressed a hand lightly to her stomach. David remained silent, his senses sharpening as he studied her closely. Emily took a shallow breath, adjusting her posture as if trying to shake off an invisible discomfort. Her hand lifted to her forehead for a brief moment, rubbing lightly at her temple before dropping back down. Then came the first real sign that something was wrong. Her other hand flexed involuntarily, the fingers curling and uncurling, as if testing for sensation. A slight tremor ran through them. She frowned, blinking again, slower this time. Rachel remained still, her movements measured, but David caught the way her eyes flickered toward his untouched coffee, then to Emily, then back to his cup. It wasn't concern. It wasn't worry for her sister's well-being. It was something else entirely, a calculation, a silent, contained panic simmering just beneath the surface. Emily let out a quiet breath, shifting in her seat. "I feel a little weird," she murmured, shaking her head slightly as if trying to clear the fog settling over her mind. Her voice lacked its usual sharpness, the energy drained from her words. She swallowed hard, rubbing her fingers together. "Tingly," she added, almost absent-mindedly. David clenched his jaw. He knew. He had known from the moment Rachel set the cup down in front of him, but now there was proof unfolding right before his eyes. Emily had taken his place, and Rachel knew it. David forced himself to stay composed. Slowly, deliberately, he reached for Emily's coffee cup, his fingers curling around the handle. Rachel's body tensed almost imperceptibly, her hand tightening on her napkin, knuckles whitening just slightly. He lifted the cup, tilting it toward his lips in a slow, measured motion. Rachel's breath hitched. It was small, quick, something no one else would have noticed, but David did. Her smile remained, but it was too tight now, too forced, her shoulders too stiff. Emily let out a soft gasp, her fingers gripping the edge of the table. "I don't feel right," she whispered, her breath shaky. Her face was paler now, her usual healthy glow dimmed under an unnatural pallor. She reached for her glass of water, but her hand trembled as she tried to lift it. Rachel let out a short laugh, light and breezy, but it rang hollow. "Maybe you're just dehydrated, Em. You barely drank anything before this." She waved a dismissive hand as if the explanation was obvious. David set the cup down without taking a sip, his gaze locked onto Rachel. "Maybe," he said lightly, watching her reaction. "Or maybe it's something else." Rachel's eyes darted to him, quick and sharp, before she schooled her expression back into practiced ease. "David," she chided with a soft chuckle. "Don't tell me you're going to start diagnosing her now." But David wasn't listening. He was thinking. The puzzle pieces were falling into place at a terrifying speed, and the truth they formed was one he wasn't sure he was ready to face. David's gaze sharpened as he locked eyes with Rachel, his voice steady but cold. "Rachel, what exactly did you put in that coffee?" His words cut through the air like a blade, and for a moment the entire room seemed to shrink around them. The casual hum of conversation, the clinking of silverware, the light laughter from the other side of the table, all of it faded into the background. Rachel blinked, her expression expertly composed, but David saw the slightest flicker of something in her eyes. Surprise? Fear? Guilt? It was there for just a second before she scoffed and rolled her eyes, leaning back in her chair with a practiced ease that might have fooled anyone else. "David, you sound ridiculous," she said with a breathy laugh, shaking her head. "It's just coffee. What are you even implying?" Emily let out a sharp, pained breath beside him, her hand pressing harder against her stomach. "God," she whispered, her voice weaker than before. She was pale now, sweat beginning to bead along her hairline. She tried to steady herself, but her fingers barely had the strength to grip the table. David's gut twisted. This wasn't something mild. This was happening too fast. He had seen this before. Not just in Emily, but in himself. The unexplained illnesses, the weakness, the nausea that came in waves after meals that Rachel had prepared. This wasn't paranoia. This wasn't a coincidence. Rachel tilted her head, feigning concern as she looked at Emily. "Maybe you just ate too fast," she offered, reaching for her water glass. "Or maybe—" "Stop," David snapped, his voice sharp enough to make Rachel's hand freeze mid-air. Her eyes flicked back to him, carefully blank, but he wasn't looking at her anymore. He was looking at Emily, at the way she struggled to focus, at the shallow rise and fall of her breath. This was it. He had played along long enough, watching, waiting, gathering the pieces of a puzzle he never wanted to solve. But now there was no more time. David stood abruptly, the legs of his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "We need to get you to a hospital," he said to Emily, his tone leaving no room for argument. Emily nodded weakly, her eyes glassy, but Rachel let out a short, nervous laugh. "Oh, come on," she said, trying to mask the strain in her voice. "You're overreacting, David. She just needs to rest." David ignored her. He reached for his phone, fingers already dialing. Rachel's entire body went rigid. "David, don't—" But it was too late. The call was already connecting. Rachel's mask had cracked, and David had seen everything he needed to see. David's fingers curled around the handle of the coffee cup, lifting it slowly, deliberately, his eyes never leaving Rachel's. The tension in the room thickened, pressing in from all sides, suffocating in its weight. He turned the cup slightly in his hand, letting the steam rise between them like a silent challenge. Then, his voice came low and sharp, cutting through the moment like a knife. "Drink it, Rachel." Rachel froze. The flicker in her eyes was small, barely noticeable to anyone else, but to David it was everything. A second too long of hesitation, a breath that hitched just slightly in her throat, the way her fingers twitched before she pressed them into the table to keep them steady. She didn't move, didn't reach for the cup, didn't scoff or roll her eyes this time. She just sat there, perfectly still. Silence stretched between them, a heavy, suffocating pause where neither of them blinked. David tilted his head, his grip tightening around the handle. "If it's just coffee, prove it," he said, his voice quieter now, but sharper, deadlier. Rachel's mouth parted, a breath escaping like she had just been struck. Then she let out a short, forced laugh, shaking her head. "Oh, come on, David," she said, her voice strained but still trying to maintain control. "You're being ridiculous. This is insane." David didn't say anything, he just waited, watching, the cup still in his hand, still extended toward her. Rachel didn't move. Emily let out a weak, strangled breath beside him. Her fingers gripped the edge of the table as she struggled to stay upright, her skin unnaturally pale, her breath shallow and uneven. Her lips trembled before she managed to whisper, "Call 911." Rachel's entire body flinched. David's jaw tightened as the final confirmation settled over him like ice. Slowly, he set the cup down, fingers already reaching into his pocket for his phone. Rachel moved before he could react. Her hand shot out, fast and desperate, fingers clawing at his wrist, trying to snatch the phone from his grip, but David was quicker. He pulled back sharply, his other hand pushing against her shoulder just enough to create space between them. Rachel's face twisted, a flash of sheer panic breaking through her carefully constructed mask, her breathing shallow and quick. "David, don't," she said, but the words lacked conviction, edged with something close to begging. David's thumb pressed down on the screen. The dial tone rang once, twice. Rachel's face drained of color. 911, what's your emergency? David's voice came out steady, unwavering. "I need an ambulance, now." Rachel let out a shaky breath, her hands curling into fists, her entire body coiled so tightly it looked like she might shatter. David's mind sharpened, every doubt, every lingering question dissolving into one brutal truth. She was guilty, and now she knew she had been caught. Rachel's breath came in short, panicked bursts, but she forced another strained laugh, shaking her head as if trying to shake the reality of the moment away. "David, you're overreacting," she snapped, her voice sharp with forced indignation. "You're making a scene over nothing. Emily probably just has low blood sugar or—" "No, Rachel." David's voice was steady, but there was steel in it now, cold and unyielding, his eyes locked onto hers with a finality that made her flinch. "I see you now." For months he had questioned himself, dismissed the nagging unease, convinced himself he was imagining things. But this was real. The truth was laid bare between them, undeniable, and Rachel knew it. Emily let out a weak groan, her hand gripping David's sleeve as she slumped slightly in her chair, her breathing coming in slow, labored gasps. "Sir," the 911 operator's voice crackled through the speaker. "What are the symptoms?" David didn't take his eyes off Rachel. Severe nausea, dizziness, tingling in her hands, difficulty breathing. Onset was almost immediate after drinking coffee. His voice didn't waver, but inside his heart pounded. Saying it out loud, confirming it, made it all the more real. There was a pause on the other end, then the dispatcher's tone shifted, more urgent now. "It sounds like possible poisoning. An ambulance is en route. Stay on the line." David's grip tightened around the phone. "Understood." Across the table, Rachel sat rigid, her face pale but her mind clearly racing. Her eyes darted toward the front door, the hallway, the windows, anywhere that could provide an escape. David saw it before she even moved. "Don't," he said, voice quiet but filled with warning. Rachel's chest rose and fell in rapid succession, her pulse visibly pounding in her throat. "David," she started, her voice softer now, desperate, as if she could still claw her way out of this. "Please, you have to believe me." David exhaled slowly, his gaze never leaving hers. "I did," he said, "and look where that got me." Rachel's lips parted like she wanted to argue, wanted to spin another lie, another excuse, but there was nothing left to say. The wail of sirens echoed in the distance. And just like that, it was too late. Rachel's hands were shaking now, her carefully crafted mask beginning to slip entirely as the sound of sirens grew closer. David could see the fight-or-flight instinct warring inside her, the panic in her eyes as she frantically searched for an escape. But there was nowhere to run, and she knew it. Emily let out a weak, strangled breath, her head tilting toward David as she tried to focus through the haze of whatever was coursing through her system. Her fingers barely had the strength to grip his sleeve, but she managed to whisper, "David, the life insurance policy." David's entire body went rigid. His mind snapped back to a conversation from months ago, one he had dismissed at the time as just another mundane adult responsibility. Rachel had insisted on updating his life insurance plan, saying it was the responsible thing to do now that he was in line for a promotion. She had smiled sweetly, assured him it was standard, even joked that she hoped she'd never have to use it, and just like that he had signed the papers, trusting her without question. Now his pulse pounded in his ears as the realization settled over him like ice. This wasn't just about his promotion. It had never been just about his career. She wasn't trying to make him look unreliable at work. She wasn't just sabotaging him. She was trying to get rid of him permanently. His grip tightened around his phone as he slowly turned to Rachel, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper. "Rachel," he said, the weight of betrayal pressing down on every syllable. "Was this ever just about my promotion?" Rachel's breath hitched. Her lips parted as if to speak, but for the first time she had no words, no quick-witted deflection, no calculated excuse. Just silence. David watched as her chest rose and fell rapidly, her mind scrambling for a way out, but there wasn't one. He could see it in her eyes. The exact moment she realized she had lost. Her shoulders stiffened, her jaw clenched, and then just as quickly as the panic had come, something else replaced it, a flash of something sharp, something ugly. She straightened slightly, exhaling shakily before letting out a soft, humorless laugh. "You were never supposed to figure it out," she muttered, her voice barely above a whisper. David's stomach twisted. His worst fears had just been confirmed, spoken aloud by the woman he had once trusted with his life. She had planned this, all of it, and he had been blind. The wail of sirens grew louder, but before the flashing lights could fill the windows, the front door burst open. The sudden movement sent a jolt of energy through the room, and David turned sharply, his pulse already hammering with the certainty that something worse was about to unfold. A man stepped inside. Matt. David recognized him immediately, the smooth-talking strategist from Rachel's firm, the one who had spent months subtly undermining him at work, planting doubts in the minds of upper management, making quiet suggestions that David wasn't as sharp as he used to be. It was Matt who had been pushing for David's removal. Matt who had been so eager to step into the power vacuum that Rachel had been carefully engineering. And now here he was. Rachel inhaled sharply, whipping her head toward Matt as if she hadn't expected him to arrive so soon. That reaction alone told David everything he needed to know. This wasn't just Rachel's scheme. She hadn't been working alone. Matt's eyes flickered between them, his features tightening when he saw Emily slumped in her chair, barely conscious, and David standing there, completely unharmed. The moment stretched unbearably, and David saw it. Matt's jaw clenching, his hands twitching at his sides. Whatever plan he and Rachel had been working on had just shattered in front of them. David's lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. His voice came out dark and sharp, every syllable coated in venom. "You two really thought I wouldn't figure it out?" Rachel stiffened, her fingers curling into fists, her entire body going rigid as if she could somehow will this moment into disappearing. Matt forced a scoff, trying to regain his composure, but the way his eyes darted toward the still open door betrayed him. "David, I don't know what you're talking about," he said, but his tone was too casual, too forced. "I just came to check on Rachel." David took a slow, deliberate step toward him, his rage simmering just beneath the surface. "Cut the act," he said. "I see it now, all of it. Rachel sets the trap, poisons me just enough to keep me weak, to make me unreliable at work. You swoop in, waiting for the moment I finally fall apart. But I didn't, did I?" Matt's nostrils flared and Rachel let out a shaky breath, but neither of them spoke. David shook his head, exhaling a bitter laugh. "You were supposed to replace me," he continued, voice steady despite the fury boiling inside him. "That was the plan, wasn't it? Take everything I built, ruin my career, and then, when that wasn't enough," his eyes flickered toward Rachel, "you decided to make sure I was gone for good." Rachel flinched, but Matt just clenched his jaw, eyes darkening. And then, as if reality had finally caught up with him, Matt did the only thing left in his arsenal. He ran. The sirens outside reached a deafening pitch, red and blue lights flashing through the windows, casting eerie shadows across the dining room walls. The weight of what was about to happen settled over the room like a storm seconds before it broke. Rachel's breath hitched, her body tensed, her eyes darting from David to the front door, to the hallway, to the back of the house. Calculating. Then she moved. She lunged for the hallway, her heels scraping against the hardwood floor as she shoved past a chair, knocking it over in her desperate attempt to escape. But she didn't even make it 2 steps before the front door burst open and uniformed officers flooded inside, guns drawn, voices barking out commands. "Seattle PD, hands where we can see them." Rachel skidded to a halt, her arms frozen mid-motion as her whole body locked up. Matt, still hovering near the door, took a step back, his hands slowly lifting as panic twisted his face. "Rachel, don't say anything," he shouted, his voice cracking under the weight of the moment. Rachel turned to him, her eyes wide, filled with something between shock and betrayal. David just stood there, watching it all unfold. He didn't speak. He didn't move. He didn't need to. The officers acted fast. 2 of them grabbed Matt first, shoving him against the nearest wall, forcing his arms behind his back as he let out a strangled protest. The sound of metal clicking shut around his wrists cut through the air, final and absolute. Rachel still hadn't moved. "Rachel Carter," one of the officers said, stepping toward her, "you're under arrest for attempted poisoning, conspiracy to commit harm, and reckless endangerment. Put your hands behind your back." For a split second, she didn't react. Her lips parted like she wanted to say something, but no words came out. Then, as if realizing this was really happening, that there was no talking her way out of it, her shoulders sagged. She turned slowly, mechanical, her hands sliding behind her back as the cold bite of steel cups locked around her wrists. She finally looked at David. It was the same face he had woken up next to for years, the same eyes that had once held warmth, the same lips that had whispered promises of love, of forever. But now, all he saw was desperation, defeat, the last remnants of control slipping from her grasp. David took a slow step forward, just close enough that only she could hear him. His voice was quiet. "Checkmate." Rachel closed her eyes. Rachel sat motionless as the judge read out the sentence, her face pale, her hands trembling slightly despite the cuffs around her wrists. The courtroom was silent except for the steady, deliberate voice that sealed her fate. "Rachel Carter, for the charges of attempted poisoning, conspiracy to commit harm, and reckless endangerment, this court sentences you to 25 years in state prison without the possibility of parole." The gavel struck, final and unforgiving. Rachel flinched, just barely, but David saw it. Matt, seated at the defendant's table beside her, didn't even lift his head. He had taken a plea deal weeks earlier, admitting to conspiracy in exchange for a reduced sentence. 5 years, that was all he got. 5 years while Rachel's life as she knew it was effectively over. David had testified against both of them. He had sat in this very chair, looking Rachel in the eye as he recounted the months of unexplained illness, the near misses, the careful, methodical way she had been poisoning him in plain sight. He had listened as the prosecution dismantled every excuse, every weak defense. And Rachel had just sat there, staring at the table, knowing there was no way out. As the bailiffs moved to escort her away, she turned one last time, her green eyes locking onto David's. For a second, something flickered there. Regret, anger, maybe even desperation. Then, just as quickly, it was gone. She didn't say a word as they led her through the door. David didn't watch her leave. He simply exhaled, letting the weight of it all settle. For the first time in a long time, it was over. David stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows of his new corner office, staring out at the Seattle skyline, the city stretching out beneath him in sharp, glittering lights. The very job Rachel had tried to steal from him, the one she had nearly destroyed him for, was now his. He had earned it. Not because Rachel was gone, not because Matt had been removed from the equation, but because he had fought for it, because when everything had tried to break him, he had stood back up. Emily knocked lightly on his door before stepping inside, looking healthier, stronger than she had in months. "Ready for lunch?" she asked, tilting her head. David turned, smiling slightly. "Yeah, let's go." They walked out together, and as the office door clicked shut behind him, David realized something. He wasn't looking over his shoulder anymore. He was free. Davio's phone buzzed against his desk, the unexpected vibration pulling his attention away from the paperwork in front of him. He glanced down, his brow furrowing slightly at the unknown number. Then, before he could dismiss it, an automated voice filled the silence of his office. "You have a collect call from Rachel Carter, an inmate at Oregon State Correctional Facility. Press 1 to accept." David's thumb hovered over the screen, his pulse steady, his expression unreadable. For a moment he just stared at the phone, the name on the screen a ghost from a life that no longer belonged to him. He wondered what she would say if he answered. Would she beg for forgiveness, try to manipulate him one last time, or had prison finally forced her to face the weight of what she had done? None of it mattered. A slow smile tugged at the corner of his lips, the first genuine one he had when thinking about her in a long, long time. Then, without hesitation, he declined the call. The screen went dark. David exhaled, leaning back in his chair, the weight in his chest lighter than it had been in years. Outside, the city moved on, and so did he. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee wrapped around him like a warm embrace, rich and earthy, the way it was supposed to be. David sat at a quiet cafe, his fingers wrapped around a mug, the steam curling into the crisp morning air. For the first time in forever, coffee didn't come with suspicion. It didn't taste like doubt or paranoia. It tasted exactly as it should. He took a slow sip, savoring it, letting the warmth spread through him as he gazed out at the city. Seattle bustled with life. Cars weaving through the streets, people rushing past on sidewalks, the world moving forward just as he had. He thought about Rachel, about the wreckage she had left behind, about the choices she had made that had led her exactly where she was now. She thought she could destroy him. But in the end, she had only destroyed herself. David lifted his cup slightly in a quiet toast, his voice just a murmur but filled with absolute certainty. To moving forward. Then he took another sip, and for the first time in a long time, it tasted like freedom. What would you have done if you were in David's position? Would you have confronted Rachel the moment you first suspected something was wrong, or would you have waited, gathering evidence the way he did? It's easy to say we'd act decisively, but when betrayal comes from the person you trust the most, when the enemy is someone who once swore to love and protect you, the lines become blurred. Would you have noticed the small signs, the subtle shifts in behavior, the fleeting looks of calculation, the moments that didn't quite add up? Or would you have dismissed them, chalking them up to paranoia, convincing yourself that the person sleeping next to you every night couldn't possibly be capable of such a thing? And what about the coffee? If you smelled something off, would you have dared to switch cups, testing your own worst fears? Or would you have hesitated, telling yourself that no one, not even the most manipulative person, would go that far? David's patience, his ability to see beyond emotion and stay one step ahead, saved his life. But not everyone has the luxury of time when danger lurks within their own home. So ask yourself, would you have waited? Would you have set a trap? Or would you have confronted Rachel right then and there, no matter the risk? Let me know in the comments. Trust is everything. When it's broken, it doesn't just hurt, it reveals. It lays bare the truth that was always lurking beneath the surface, exposing the cracks that were hidden in plain sight. David trusted Rachel for years, blind to the darkness that grew behind her perfect smile. And when that trust shattered, it didn't just show him who she was, it showed him who he was. Someone stronger than he ever realized. Betrayal doesn't always come from the outside. Sometimes the people who stand closest to us, the ones we share our lives with, are the very ones capable of cutting us the deepest. The lesson? Stay sharp, pay attention, because the biggest threats aren't always the loudest. Sometimes they whisper. Sometimes they bring you coffee with a smile. But betrayal is not the end. It can break you, but it doesn't have to define you. True strength isn't just about surviving, it's about rising. It's about refusing to let someone else's darkness pull you under. David didn't just make it through, he thrived, and that is the real victory. So here's the question you should be asking yourself. If someone tried to destroy you, would you let them? Or would you, like David, rise from the ashes and take back your life? To moving forward. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories that reveal the truth, test the limits of trust, and showcase the strength it takes to rebuild after betrayal. Every story we share is a reminder that resilience isn't just about surviving hardship, it's about emerging stronger, wiser, and more in control of your own destiny. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever faced a moment where you had to question the people closest to you, or if you've found strength in walking away from someone who meant to harm you, let us know in the comments. Your story might just be the inspiration someone else needs to take back their own power. And remember, sometimes the most dangerous enemies are strangers. They're the ones who know exactly where to strike. But no matter how deep the betrayal, no matter how much someone tries to break you, you always have a choice. You can let it destroy you, or you can use it as the fuel to become something greater. Together, we can create a world where truth wins, where strength is found in resilience, and where no one has to walk through betrayal alone. Stay sharp, stay strong, and as always, keep moving forward.